Hello, hello, and welcome to the podcast. And today I'm really, really excited. I have a fantastic, phenomenal woman, Achara Ta- uh, Taf- Tafara. No,
Tarfa.
Tarfa. Tarfa. I'm sorry. She is amazing. And I have to tell you quickly how I found her, but I was researching this topic, trauma, and I had reached out to another young lady and she was super busy and she said, but I know someone else. And then that led to someone else. And so I said, I really, really need to speak with her because her information and just the vibe that I guess you can kind of feel someone's energy from just looking at their page on Instagram, which is a plus about social media. But yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Asher, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm really good with names, but this morning I'm not. Achara, thank you. Achara is a trauma recovery coach. And I will get into that whole thing, but she is also a former international speech language pathologist turned certified trauma recovery coach, supervisor candidate with the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches, board member of PATH, a nonprofit organization that provides free weekly support meetings for those seeking healing from addictions and trauma. That's definitely awesome. And a five-time panelist with the Trauma Research Foundation book club, No Bad Parts. So welcome to the Unquiet Mind. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Sawadee-ka, as my mother would say in our native tongue of Thai. Hello, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I can't tell you how heavy this topic is for me. I was talking to my mother, who is actually a therapist, and I said, Mom, I'm speaking to this wonderful woman about trauma. And she said, well, what about it? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't really know much about this whole topic. I just recognized maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, yeah, you had a trauma. And it came from my diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And so you and I spoke briefly about that initially when we had our first conversation. And I never connected the two, thinking that being diagnosed is actually a form of trauma, being diagnosed with something, as major as multiple sclerosis.
It can definitely be traumatic. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so I have my notes here. So you guys, sorry, I'm reading here, but I started reading, and what I read about trauma is that basically it's an emotional event or an emotional response to an event, a major disturbing, life-changing event. It could be a natural disaster, it could be a divorce, it could be a rape, it could be a diagnosis, it could be war, like, people go off to war and have PTSD. That's trauma. But I just read in general, trauma can be defined as a psychological, emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. And I wanted to dive right in, and this is kind of your wheelhouse, and I am so excited to hear all of what you have to contribute. And I wanted to know, what is your thought on how trauma is defined?
So first, my first thing is I want to get a little curious with you. Maybe we can unravel that. So how do you know now, you said 3 months or 4 months ago, how do you know that what happened to you when you were told about this diagnosis? What tells you that it was traumatic?
That's such an incredible question. Number one, I would say I was in denial for a decade. I associate trauma to some sort of shock and denial. And that it put me, those words, you have MS, put me in that state for a period of time. I just called it denial. I didn't call it anything else. I didn't want it. I visibly, if you looked at me, you would know that I had MS. So if nobody knows I'm sick, then I'm not sick.
Mm, mm.
So that's kind of the first thing that came to my mind when I associated me having this traumatic event happen.
So that shock, right? Where did you feel that in your body, this shock?
In my chakras, and we can explain that later, but in
Yeah,
my gut and my heart
in your
center.
gut and your heart.
Yeah.
So we can just take that, right? We know that something is traumatic or that we're experiencing trauma, right? When we have those sort of physical responses to us, like we don't think, oh, that's dangerous, let me get away from it. When a car is coming, we jump out of the way, right? And then we process it later on and go, oh, that was a car that almost hit me. Let me get out. I needed to get out of the way. And so, and then after that, it's the, oh my gosh, a car almost just hit me. And wow. And then how that then affects us. So, people say, oh, it's what happened to you. People say it's the wound that you carry from what's happened to you. It's, I would add in, it's if that wound manifests then in this hopelessness and you feel like there's just no way out of it, and some of that is quite real, like a medical diagnosis. You often feel like this is it. That's the writing on the wall. That's my life, and this is how I have to live. And then it's becomes part of your identity and who you are, and defines your whole life, and all of this stuff. And as a trauma recovery coach, I work in the area of the internal family systems world. We talk about that in a bit. But someone was asking me the other day in my supervision, I was supervising some trauma recovery coaches, and they were talking about, how do I sort of take my hat off, this hat, and then put this hat on, right? The mom hat or the friend hat or this hat or that hat. And for me, it's important to understand, or for me, it's important to have this sense of self that, yes, maybe something that's happened to me is traumatic, or I see as trauma, and it really is, right? But there is hope, right? There is recovery from trauma. There are stories of people who, there are medical professionals that believe that a physical manifestation such as MS or cancer or whatnot is correlated to trauma from early childhood, and it's correlated to trauma from intergenerational, like genetic code being passed down. There are epigenetic tags and biomarkers that make you predisposed or more sensitive to things, if you look at Rachel Yehuda's work. So to answer that question, I know that's kind of long-winded. I think it's a lot of it. It's all of it. It's all of it. And it's how that then carries within you, right? And how that manifests in your relationship to yourself, your relationship to the world, and your relationship with people that are around you on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Wow. I think I also had a bit of fear. I read somewhere in all of these notes about trauma, and we can talk about this later. But I definitely felt my nervous system go into some sort of major reaction, and it was fear. And I don't know if I would label it fight or flight, and maybe you can talk about that. But I think that that's what it was. And when you mentioned childhood and genetic, correct me if
epigenetic tags, there's a whole field called epigenetics where that is what they do. They research sort of biomarkers and are sort of genetic tags. There's the cherry blossom almond study that was done on mice. I don't know if you're familiar with that study.
No.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you real quick if you'd like to.
Yeah, sure.
So there was a study done on mice where, and the other thing is I used to think, well, why mice? Why do you keep studying mice? And it turns out that 99% of our DNA or whatnot matches with mice, and I didn't know that. So that's why. And mice, their generation cycle is 12 weeks, whereas humans are 20 years. So studies can be done using them, sort of kind of in a rapid result way, right? Anyways, so male mice were given the scent of this like cherry blossom almond scent, and then they were shocked, right? Whenever time they smelled the scent. Horrible, but that's what happened. Then these mice were, of course, mated and had pups, and they were mated with females who were not exposed to that scent.
Mhm.
The generation that came after, right, the pups that they had, showed an aversion to the smell of cherry blossom almond, even though the pups were never threatened with shock, were never exposed with it at all. They had an aversion for it. And what the studies showed is that the epigenetic tag was on the sperm of the male mice. That's where they found it. And so in studies now, like there's one on the World Trade Center that Rachel Yehuda did with women who were pregnant in their 3rd trimester, and they gave birth to their kids. And these kids have, been more inclined to have sort of these traits, right? Maybe low stress tolerance sort of stuff, right? Well, in that study, she was able to find 16 different epigenetic tag markers. So the study is still emerging. This is a brand new field. She just spoke at the Trauma Research Foundation conference this year, earlier this spring. And I think it was actually in May. And so the field is still very much emerging as far as her research with that. I think she's also doing research on what makes a person resilient that has had trauma passed down through generation after generation.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so trauma is intergenerational as transgenerational. It transmits through caregiving. It transmits through epigenetic tags, right? It transmits secondary. We live in a world now where we are exposed to such violence here in America on a repeated basis. And so even though it's not happening to me, I'm watching it happen before me. And so that's secondary trauma, and then we have culture and history. So trauma's passed that way, so trauma is it's such a complex thing that we deal with, and we don't stop to think how it affects us or how our bodies are reacting, because we live in such a world where we're taught to survive and fragment ourselves, right? Leave work at home, dad, don't bring it home, or mom, and then when you come home you have to put on your new hat, but there's no way of navigating this, right? We just have to live in these boxes, and because integrating them or overlapping them, it's going to feel super unsafe. But with trauma recovery, right, and with all these things that are coming out now, we can develop the skills, we can find the hope in between.
Right, because I completely compartmentalized my trauma, if you will. And I lived in those boxes, like you said, like this is my MS time. This is my, mom time. It just made sense for me in order to manage and cope day to day.
Yeah, because how else are you going to do it?
Right.
There's really no way at all to do that.
Right.
That's how we live. That's what we're taught. But if we can be taught that, for example, if I'm not feeling well, if I can be taught, which I wasn't, I was raised very much, you compartmentalize, you suck it up, buttercup. But if I can communicate to my kids, hey, mom's not feeling well right now, I just need some time, and then my child then able to respond with, well, what do you need? Well, I just need some snuggles. Okay, well, let's sit here and snuggle. that not every mom, of course, or parent needs that. Maybe some parent needs actually to be alone, but to be able to have the freedom to do that and to have support and safety around you that enables you to do that. I guess my point is, we live in this fragmented world, but what would it look like to not live that way, to actually feel safe and secure in ourselves, in the world around us, and in the relationships that we have? I just had a 2-hour meeting with my family the other day. I sit them all down. I even brought my father in, and we all get to talk about what's going on. They get to express what they're, you know what I'm saying? So that I'm making sure that trauma that I dealt with isn't passed down to my kids, and they learn my behaviors and so forth. And they understand that they have voice and choice in all things. And we do as human beings.
Mhm.
We think that we don't have voice and choice because oftentimes, especially when you talk about it from a historical cultural perspective, if I voice up, if I speak up, that's going to lead me into danger.
Right. Well, we
So,
carry, like you said, we certainly carry it, like from this historical context. If you think about something as fresh and recent as slavery, even though it's not recent, but you understand what I'm saying. Like that's trauma that's carried down through generations, and
yeah,
it's just stuck in our, I guess, DNA, and they would find that in the epigenetics, as you explained.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, there's a study in Australia that's done with people that, Aborigines and people that, I don't even know if that's a politically correct word, so I apologize in advance if they don't use that word anymore. I don't
I
know.
don't know. I know.
Yeah. So, the people that live in Australia, they've shown, it's colonization has affected so many people around the world. And so there's this process of decolonization that's going on that kind of goes, wait, hold up, that was what was imposed on us. Our ancestors actually did it this way. They actually healed through song and story and collective sweat lodges and stuff like that. It's this world we live in now where any type of thing like that is like really frou-frou, like, oh, that's kind of weird. But I tell you, every week I get together with groups of people. I have a women's group and I have a BIPOC group. And every week I hold a safe container from anywhere from, 5 to 20 people. And we come together in our PAC meetings, and we come together and we talk about our struggles. We talk about, the trauma, the stuff that's happened to us. And I hear over and over again, this is the first time in my life that I feel safe. And you're talking people in their 50s, 60s. This is the first time in my life where I feel safe. I just had someone in one of our groups report that, she just had a cancer, she just went through chemo and all these things. And she 100% believes that her healing has been a direct result of her working on her trauma and being in recovery.
Right. Because I feel like it's almost the body's natural reaction to some sort of, like they said, psychological, emotional disturbance. Your body, it's protecting itself. So
Absolutely.
you're you naturally will go into some sort of I don't know what it is, but like a shield. Your body wants to put up a shield against whatever is attacking it, because
Absolutely.
it's an attack on your peace, or on your everyday, your day-to-day living. I would even say that seeing an accident is traumatic. I remember I was
Secondary.
on the it's a trauma. I'll never forget this. And I still, like, to this day, I was on the highway with my mom. We were driving somewhere, and I saw a car on the other side, like total other side, far away from us. It it was cut off and didn't have anywhere to go but up. And I don't know, somebody clipped this person. The car flipped and turned over and kind of like was skidding on its, on the roof of the car. And I had the worst reaction because I thought, oh my God, that car could flip and come on this side, where we're driving.
Yeah.
I would assume that maybe that's not the heavy trauma that we're talking about, but I would assume that that could be considered a trauma because the person I don't think made it.
But even right now, when you're remembering it, I bet you can still feel that feeling in your body,
Yes.
right? Dr. Peter Levine, he talks about that being the residue that's deposited inside of ourselves.
Wow.
And that trigger, it's not the trigger that is what causes it, right? It's that being sort of the residue
Right.
that's remained from that. And so maybe is it possible that has maybe added to anxiety or hypervigilance for you when you drive or when you're walking on the street? That memory is very clearly, I was watching your face and body language as you were telling it, that's very clearly stored, right? In your body.
I think about it all the time. When I'm driving with my son, I'm like, oh gosh, it was something that is definitely stored. And again, going back to the original question that you asked, how do I feel or how did I feel when I was given the diagnosis? That fear, that same kind of feeling that I felt seeing that event, even though it's not relatable, like, being given a diagnosis and seeing a car accident, but the fear portion is there.
Your responses, right? We talk about those trauma responses, right? So we've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? So the fight part is, put my dukes up, so to speak, right? I've got to protect myself. And the flight is, I got to get out of here real quick. Oftentimes we go to fight, and then if we can't fight, we want to run, right? Or some of us run first. And then the freeze is like this immobile state, right? This sort of like deer in headlights, but it's still active, right? You're still active, but you're just immobile but active in your nervous system. And then the fawn is sort of that people pleasing, mitigating, fawning, as it has a special place in my heart because it's what I did to survive. I fawned my entire life.
Mhm.
I was raised in an Asian culture where you are subservient, you are seen and not heard. And if someone's mad at you, it's probably your fault. Or if someone's mad, what did you do? Like maybe it's your fault. And so then you mitigate, you try to fix everything and people please all around you. And then that led me into getting into relationships where instead of having voice and choice and boundaries and stuff, I would fawn. So we can start to identify our trauma responses. And so for you, it sounds like when you're driving, you're still driving, but it sounds like you have that freeze, sort of deer in headlights response while you're driving still. You said it happens all the time. So yeah, I would consider that secondary trauma has, contained that there's still residue from that event in your body.
For sure. And, even going to the MS portion or the diagnosis, because it's not necessarily just like this is for anybody who's diagnosed, I would say, you're reminded when you are given a diagnosis like, you have an autoimmune illness or something like that, you're reminded like every day of this event or this trauma because your body may not work a certain way or you may not be feeling well. And so it's just kind of this reminder all the time. And I guess that's like a question I have for you. How do we get to a point where we're not dwelling in that space or that feeling and wanting to fight?
Yeah. There's a really good quote by Janine Fisher about that. Let me find the quote real quick because that's what comes to my mind.
Mhm.
To answer, you said so basically, like, how do we heal? Right? Like, that's like, how do we get there? How do we navigate sort of living as though we didn't have this trauma or whatnot ever even happen to us?
And I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead because I know it's a process.
Yeah, no. So she says, Janine Fisher, and she works a lot with sort of this polyvagal and social engagement system. She says the pause between the trigger and the response is where the healing happens. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that because I like to stay in the pause.
Right.
Right. It's, and to go back, I've also found the quote by Peter Levine. It says, traumatic symptoms are not caused by the triggering event itself. They stem from the frozen residue of energy that has not been resolved and discharged. So how do we then find that energy, right? Identify it, right?
Yeah.
And then help it to discharge in that paused space.
Yes. Yes.
That's the magic bean, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, actually. How does a person identify the trauma response? Like, how do you even know, yeah, that is something that's happened to you and you're having a response, you're not crazy? Because I really went through the whole thing, like, what's wrong with me? I'm, going through all of these emotional changes, physical changes. Am I going crazy? What is it? What's
Yeah.
the label?
It took me a while to figure out mine. I'm going to be, completely transparent about that, right? First, you kind of got to learn what they are. So there's some psychoeducation about what trauma is and how it transmits, and then how we respond, right? How our nervous system responds to it all. And then with that understanding, we can then take that information and sort of apply it to our own life, our interactions with ourselves, our interactions with others, and our interaction with the world. And so if I, for instance, have a reaction, have something happen, and I can choose to either respond, right, to it, or react to it. And I want to be able to, and the difference between responding and reacting is reaction is more of a impulse. I can't control it, just came out of me. Whereas response is I've taken time and I say, in IFS, we say, I check with my parts to see what they think and how they're feeling and so forth. So I think that is sort of how you find out what your trauma responses are.
Right.
That's how you find out. I was saying earlier about the hat, like I have this hat, I have that hat. And somebody asked me, well, how do you know when to take your hat off and to put the other hat on? And that's because I've spent a lot of time identifying my trauma responses. So if I am somewhere and I notice I start to have a fawning response, right? I'm wanting this person to like me. And so I want to just kind of people please. Or I saw someone, an influencer the other day, she said, did I sign up to do this? Yes. Do I like doing that? Absolutely not. Did I do it just to be closer to this person? I sure did. So, that's it. So it's funny, right? But that's how we start to kind of know, oh, wait, I did that because that's a trauma, that's fawning, that's a trauma response, or I know that I have, I'm in a high conflict co-parenting relationship. And that's the relationship, high conflict co-parenting with my ex. But anyways, that when I deal with my son, right? And my son does something, maybe it's school related, maybe whatever related it is, and it causes me to have a reaction of anger. I know that is rooted in, that's the sort of hard emotion. The soft emotion under that is grief and sadness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm having a fight response because there's still residue from you know, the choices I made to sort of, in my mind, save us from the situation that we were in so that I could be fully present for him. And then now I see that maybe he's not making the best choices. I mean, he's a teenager. Hello. We're not gonna, you know, I give him some grace, but you know, I'll have sort of this fight response with him that is rooted in my own trauma response. And I cannot tell you how many times that I've said to him, you know, and we're not talking like this big thing, right? You know, we're not talking about this huge, massive explosions of anger, but we are talking about maybe my voice was raised, you know, and I didn't have to raise my voice, and how that affects him. And so I can just kind of sit back and go, you know what, that was one of my trauma responses. I felt like my fight response came out with you in that situation, and his fight response comes out too. So we can talk about that in our language. We talk about that stuff all the time. And that's just the lingo in this house now. Like one time I was in a disagreement with my own husband, and it was so funny. And we haven't talked about shame yet, but we'll get to shame too. But it was like your denial that you mentioned earlier. That's also a shame response.
Yeah.
But he was saying something, and you know, you've ever been into an argument with somebody, but then the active complaint is no longer the complaint, like they throw something out of left field.
Right.
So he did that. And then I started going, oh yeah, shame me, great shamer. Like I was just, I noticed that once we start to identify how we feel shame and express shame or project it, or how our trauma responses show up in our day-to-day, we can then navigate that. And it's a beautiful thing. And I'm smiling right now because we have that balance. We have that in my family now. And that would have never happened, right? That would have never happened had I not understood trauma and its responses and all of it.
I love this. Like this is helping me so much because I mean, I can definitely implement it in my, you know, mini family with my son and give him the vocabulary and explain to him what this is about and what it means because, you know, I can already feel the tension and he's just 11 years old, but he's heading into middle school and, you know, the little attitude and the, oh, mom, yeah, okay, you know, the little mini talking back. It's like, okay, what's going on? Really, what's underneath this anger or frustration that you're feeling? And I feel guilt sometimes. A lot of times, that's a whole different topic, but the guilt and the shame that comes along with being a single mom and oh gosh, yeah, that's yeah.
That's another talk.
That's another one.
That's another talk.
Right. You said 3 letters, IFS. Can you explain that?
So internal family systems is a model that was founded by Dick Schwartz, and I believe over 40 years ago. He's still a young guy. And it is the idea that we are not mono-minded, right? That we sort of have a multiple mindedness of parts. And if you think about it, a person can be talking and they're like, well, a part of me feels this. And then, well, but then I've got this one part of me that feels like that. And we often kind of bounce back and forth, right? And so it's like, well, part of me. So that's sort of the language that we use. And the model is broken down between, you know, and I don't have to get into it. People can look up Dr. Richard Schwartz and the IFS Institute. And there's lots of stuff out there, but that's sort of what it is. It's this idea that every single part of us, right? These behaviors or these emotions, right? In the IFS world, we have parts that are that have burdens. So those are typically like extreme emotions.
Okay.
But all of these parts, they all have positive intentions. Some of them are like, they're protectors. We have parts that are called protectors, and they're divided up between managers and firefighters. And the managers you can think of as like, you know, the people that manage our lives, right? The mom part, for me as a trauma recovery part. There's all these different parts to help. There's a path part that helps me manage my life. And then if those parts sort of aren't doing their best job, then we have these firefighters parts that come in. And those are those sort of what society would see as those excessive behaviors of those isms, right? These alcoholisms, disassociation, turning to doom scrolling all the time and lots of media, workaholism, things that we turn to in excess. So those are those. And then we have these exiles, right? Which other people would call inner children, right?
Mhm.
So lots of people do inner child work, or reparenting work. And so the managers, and firefighters, these protectors, they all protect the exile, these wounded parts of us. And so in internal family systems, we recognize that there are multiple parts of us that are all just trying to keep the system going and alive. And all these parts have a positive intent, and not one of them is bad. Not one of them is bad.
Mhm.
So we identify that. And then at the core of it all is us, is self. We are who we are inherently, created by higher power, or the divine, or whatever it is that you spiritually believe in. So you have this divine self, and then you have you have the divine, which is self, and then you have the you as self. And the goal is to just sort of unblend, like help all these parts not hijack you.
Right. Yeah.
So with these burdened emotions, and that you can kind of tell everybody, hey, everybody, trust me, I got it. I'm in control. You just, I'm driving, everybody just sit. And then when I need some advice from the trauma recovery coach part, I have a conversation with that part.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? That's sort of a real quick rundown of that. I would highly, highly encourage people to read his book, No Bad Parts, because it's transformational.
Yeah. I'll have to put that in the notes at the bottom of the show notes for sure. The title of the book and the author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what internal family systems sort of kind of is. And when in our path meetings, we acknowledge, we come in and we speak for our parts, not from them. So if we're feeling anger or burdened by that, we'll go, I have a part that's feeling upset or angry about this situation. And so you're speaking for your parts, not from your parts.
Mhm.
Instead of going, I'm angry, I'm da-da-da, that's an indication that you have a part that's burdened by that extreme emotion. And it just needs something. It needs something from you. So what does it need? And we find out what it needs, and
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. We have so much to cover. And so this is certainly going to be, like ongoing. It's going to be a series, but kind of like before we, go towards the end of this, I wanted to talk about something that I read, and I know you're not able to, and I'm not able, we can't diagnose, but
No.
I was reading about trauma. What is it? There's two types of trauma diagnosis. And so I can't remember the website. I'll have to find that website. But it was talking about acute trauma and chronic trauma. Can you briefly explain the difference between the two? I mean, most people know what acute and chronic means, but just kind of like give an overview of what that
Yeah,
would be.
I think the definitions that you sent were, it's a single event or a dangerous event, right? So like your car example, right, with the accident and so forth.
Mhm.
According to that definition, it would be considered acute, right?
Mhm.
And then chronic is that repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. And that's where sort of the field of complex trauma comes about. And complex trauma, defined, if you look complex trauma up by lots of organizations, it really describes both children's exposure to multiple traumatic events that stem from interpersonal relationships, so sometimes caregiver or whatnot, and the long-term effects of that exposure. So you're talking about childhood emotional neglect, right? So often, child abuse, there's severe cases, but there's also just understanding that childhood emotional neglect, that if your parents love you, they love you, but maybe they just didn't attune with you. Maybe they just didn't know how to attune. And by attunement, I mean live in harmony with you.
Mhm.
Like I say so much in my family because we have a 4-year-old toddler. And then there's lots of, older teens and adults. And they're like, oh yeah, I spent time with her. And I'm like, yeah, but that time that you spent with her, was she in your world or were you in hers?
Oh, great question. Yeah.
Because if your idea of spending time with her is you're on a video game and she's on a video game, or you're on a video game and she's watching you play your video game and talking, that's her being in your world.
Yes.
How are you in hers? How are you attuning, being in harmony with her?
Yeah.
And that always stops them in their tracks, right? Because the answer is like, oh yeah, I didn't attune, mom.
In the face, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So attunement is such a big part of trauma recovery.
Mhm.
It's so important, validating and attuning. I think you and I spoke, oftentimes someone saying I love you doesn't really resonate,
Mhm.
but someone saying I hear you, that resonates big. Or I see you.
Yes.
I know for me that was a big deal. I see you, because a lot of my time was spent feeling invisible as a kid,
Mm.
not fitting in the appropriate boxes because I'm bicultural and biracial. And, um, I didn't act or behave or speak or whatever the way someone, when they first saw me, thought I would be. So, yeah, there's attunement is huge, huge part of trauma recovery, and a huge everyone, because we're in our families. I mean, I say this jokingly, but I want to meet someone who hasn't experienced any form of trauma in any way, because I want to sit down at a table and meet a unicorn, because I've never met one before.
No, I can relate to that. Going back to my diagnosis, I would naturally assume that this was the most traumatic event that's ever happened to me, being diagnosed in my life. Um, but quite often I've had it for 22 years, and so I've lived for 22 years with the feeling of not being seen, not being heard, not feeling worthy. And I have translated all of that into other aspects of my life and relationships, be it romantic partnerships or family relationships. It gets in the way, and I don't want it to get in the way. I want to heal. I want to go on this journey, and I want others to go on that as well. But that's been a huge part of it, not being seen, not being heard. And then sometimes I have to catch myself if I'm in a discussion or an argument or a disagreement with someone who's really close to me. And I'll say, you're not hearing me. You're not hearing me. But
Mhm.
really, who am I talking to? Am I talking to me and the trauma? Am I talking to the EMS? Am I talking to the person? Like, I don't know. It doesn't like make sense in my brain sometimes.
Yeah, I hear that so much. There's a term called neuroception, right? And let me look up that and we can of course talk about it. It's detection without awareness. Neuroception describes the way the autonomic nervous system takes in information without involving the thinking parts of the brain. It responds to cues of safety and danger inside the body, outside in the environment, and between people. So when our neuroception matches, right, with what we're seeing, then we feel socially engaged. We feel that sort of heart connection, brain connection, all of that. But when that's off and there's a mismatch, then that's where you know, we can't, not that we can't heal, but that's where that hopelessness or that feeling of, oh, I don't understand what's going on. Why are you not listening? Why can we not look? Because all of us have neuroception.
Right.
All of us have it. And so we're looking for is your nervous system able to handle what I'm saying and take everything in? Is my nervous system able to handle how you're responding or taking in with what you're saying? And so it's like robust nervous system to robust nervous system, or, trauma response to trauma response, sort of. And if we can all just sort of understand this, it's like, we're going to have this kumbaya experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, it's like finding the right step in this beautiful dance,
Yeah, it's all about, it's all about creating safety and harmony. People come to my groups and they're always amazed at how safe they feel in talking about some of the deepest parts of their lives.
Right.
And not just with me, with other people,
Others.
strangers,
Yeah.
right? Strangers who are sharing the same stories. And, we'll have people say, every time I come here, I feel like I'm watching myself speak to me in different parts, and just, I feel so not alone anymore. And isn't that what we all want? Just to know that we're not alone?
Absolutely. I saw it was a documentary about just what you said, human interaction and how we don't want to be alone, and why touch is so important. And to humans, like we were meant to not live alone and be alone. You wonder why we have different tribes and different clusters of people in these areas, and why do we all just come together the way that we do. So
no, we all ask ourselves, is it safe to connect, right? This co-regulation, this ability to sort of be in harmony between me and you, it is literally a biological imperative for our survival.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah, but that also can feel very scary, right? If we don't have the tools, if we've never experienced it, if we've had interpersonal wounding, from somebody who was supposed to take care of us but didn't. We learned how to survive on our own, and we develop all these survival strategies, or some diagnosis comes our way, and it's easier said than done. It definitely takes the work and safe spaces.
For sure. Absolutely. Oh, this is so, like, I cannot wait for the next episode and like getting deeper into this topic. I can't thank you enough. You are like a wealth of information, like diving into this pool of Achara.
And I'm sorry if I'm like all over the place sometimes. I just
Oh,
just me. I just show up as,
yeah, no, this is perfect. And again, it's about helping others heal. And that's kind of like, that's why I'm here, why I feel like why the universe and my higher powers kind of placed me here and placed us here, helping each other.
It's so special. Like, we don't have it all figured out, where I tell my I'm so blessed to be able to supervise, as in the association, and I tell them, that all the time, like, I'm still in recovery too, and trauma recovery too. Like, I don't know everything. We're all here as peers, learning and growing and being in safety together. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal. People say, oh, I found my people, and I would love, if my mission or goal could be that we all are able to say that, cross-culturally, cross-religion, all that, that all of our people are people.
Me too.
That's that makes me want to have tears, but I have hope.
Me too.
One group, one small bit at a time.
Yep.
One conversation at a time, like this.
Yeah. So next up we'll talk about God knows what, but there's just so much polyvagal, neuroplasticity, neurofeedback.
Neuroplasticity is great, which makes all this possible in our brain, our ability to really heal our brains. Yeah, that's a real thing. That's cool. I'd love to share more about that too.
So thank you, thank you, thank you. And where can people find you? How can all of these fabulous people come and look you up?
They can find me on IG, Instagram, at Achara Tarfa, just my name, at Achara Tarfa, or they can find me on my website at www.acharatarfa.com. If they want to see the book club that I did with the Trauma Research Foundation, they can go to the Trauma Research Foundation's YouTube channel and type in No Bad Parts and see that 5-week series. And if they'd love to come to a PATH meeting, we would love to have them, and they can go to www.path2recovery.org and find any one of our multiple meetings that happen weekly. I host a weekly Women Wednesdays meeting and then a BIPOC meeting on Thursday. And the Thursday BIPOC meeting is 11 a.m. Eastern time, and the Wednesday women's meeting is 10 a.m. Eastern time. And that's how they can find me.
Perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I think I titled this podcast and my upcoming book, which whenever I finish it, The Unquiet Mind, because there is so much going on in this mind and your mind and all of our minds, especially when it comes to trauma and trauma recovery. So, yeah.
Yeah. As we're going through, we all are really just looking for that validation and that attunement. We all have a story that we tell ourselves, a story that the world tells us, a story that people tell us. Yeah, it's all about the stories and understanding that in those stories, where there is no hope, how can we get hope inside there?
Yeah.
I was laughing. I think Dr. Dick Schwartz had said one time, I heard him once say, you sort of have to be kind of like a hope merchant. And I love that phrase.
I love that too.
I love the hope merchant. I would absolutely wear that hat all day long.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, we'll have the next one up soon and next conversation, and then hope people can get a lot from this. I'm sure they will.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me as a guest and just reaching out to me. It's been a joy getting to know you and your story. And I look forward to more of our conversations together.
Me too. I know. I feel like, okay, you're like part of this tribe now that I have. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.